Hey everyone! Have you ever found yourself in an argument where no matter how sound your points are, the other person just won't budge? It's like talking to a brick wall, only the brick wall occasionally throws insults back at you. Whether it's online debates, political discussions, or everyday disagreements, knowing how to argue effectively can feel like a superpower. And that's what we're talking about today. How to win arguments, not by shouting the loudest, but by using the force of logic like a Jedi Knight of reason. So, before we can win arguments, we need to understand the fundamental building blocks of logic. Think of it like constructing a house. You wouldn't just start throwing bricks together and hoping for the best, right? You need a blueprint, a plan. And that's where premises and conclusions come in. A premise is like a foundational truth, a starting point for our argument. It's something we can all agree on. For example, a premise could be, all humans are mortal. Pretty straightforward, right? Now the conclusion is where we want to end up, the point we're trying to prove. So, building on our earlier premise, a conclusion could be, Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. See how we logically moved from a generally accepted truth to a specific conclusion? Evidence is the meat of our argument, the facts, data, or examples that support our claims. Without evidence, our arguments are just empty assertions, like a house without walls to hold it up. Imagine you're arguing that reading improves your vocabulary. You could say, reading exposes you to new words and their usage in context, which helps you understand and incorporate those words into your own vocabulary. The key is to make sure your evidence is relevant, reliable, and directly supports your conclusion. So we've got our premises, our conclusions, and our evidence. But how do we make sure our arguments are logically sound? That's where we need to be wary of logical fallacies, which are like cracks in the foundation of our house. All right, let's talk about those logical fallacies, the sneaky little gremlins that can derail even the most well-intentioned arguments. These are flaws in reasoning that make an argument invalid, even though it might sound convincing on the surface. It's like a magician using misdirection. They distract you with flashy tricks, while the real sleight of hand is happening elsewhere. One common fallacy is the ad hominem attack. Instead of addressing the argument itself, someone using an ad hominem attack goes after the person making the argument. It's like saying, well, you can't trust anything he says, he's wearing mismatched socks. Even if the person making the argument is a walking fashion disaster, it doesn't automatically invalidate their points. Another fallacy to watch out for is the straw man. This is where someone misrepresents their opponent's argument, making it easier to attack. Imagine you're arguing for the benefits of a plant-based diet, and your opponent says, so you want everyone to eat nothing but grass and starve? That's ridiculous. They've created a straw man, a distorted version of your argument, making it seem extreme and illogical. And then there's the false dichotomy, where someone presents only two options when, in reality, there might be many. It's like saying you're either with us or you're against us. These are just a few examples of the many logical fallacies out there. Learning to spot them is like developing a superpower, allowing you to see through the smoke and mirrors of faulty reasoning. By being aware of logical fallacies and addressing them head-on, you can help elevate the level of discourse and ensure that the best ideas, not the loudest voices, prevail. Let's face it, arguments can be emotionally charged. Whether it's a heated debate about politics, a disagreement with a loved one, or even just a frustrating online exchange, our emotions can quickly hijack the conversation, turning us from cool-headed logicians into, well, not-so-cool-headed versions of ourselves. Think about a time when you got caught up in the heat of the moment. Maybe your voice got louder, your palms got sweaty, and suddenly you were saying things you didn't necessarily mean. We've all been there. When emotions run high, our brains go into fight-or-flight mode, and logical thinking takes a backseat. The amygdala, the part of our brain responsible for processing emotions, goes into overdrive, while the prefrontal cortex, the area associated with rational thought and decision-making, takes a bit of a break. So how do we prevent emotions from hijacking our logic? The first step is awareness. Recognize your own emotional triggers, those topics or situations that tend to push your buttons. Once you know what sets you off, you can start developing strategies to manage those emotions. One helpful technique is to take a pause. If you feel yourself getting heated, excuse yourself for a moment and take a few deep breaths. Physically removing yourself from the situation, even briefly, can give your prefrontal cortex a chance to catch up and regain control. Another strategy is to practice active listening. Instead of just waiting for your turn to speak, really try to understand what the other person is saying. By truly hearing them out, you might find that your own defensiveness starts to dissipate. Let's be real. Sometimes we encounter arguments that are just plain weak. Maybe the logic is flawed, the evidence is shaky, or the whole thing just feels like a house of cards waiting to be blown over. So how do we dismantle these arguments without resorting to insults or personal attacks? First and foremost, be respectful. Even if you think someone's argument is completely off base, remember that they're entitled to their opinion. Attacking the person rather than their ideas is not only disrespectful but also unproductive. Instead of saying, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," try something like, "I understand where you're coming from, but I'm not sure I follow your logic. Could you elaborate on that point?" By asking clarifying questions, you show that you're genuinely interested in understanding their perspective, even if you don't agree with it. Another effective tactic is to focus on the evidence, or the lack thereof. If someone is making a claim that you find dubious, politely ask for their sources or supporting data. If they can't back up their assertions with credible evidence, it'll become clear that their argument is on shaky ground. By approaching arguments with respect, focusing on the evidence, and anticipating counter-arguments, you can help ensure that the conversation remains civil and productive, even when there are disagreements. So far, we've talked about the importance of logic, evidence, and emotional control in arguments. But there's one more crucial ingredient that can make all the difference: persuasion. Persuasion is the art of convincing others to see your point of view, not through force or coercion, but through compelling arguments and a genuine desire to connect. It's about building bridges, not walls. One key to persuasion is empathy. Put yourself in the other person's shoes. Why might they hold the beliefs they do? What are their values and experiences that have shaped their perspective? By understanding where they're coming from, you can tailor your arguments in a way that resonates with them on a deeper level. Another important aspect is storytelling. Humans are hardwired for stories. We connect with narratives that evoke emotions, create empathy, and make complex ideas more relatable. When presenting your arguments, try to weave in personal anecdotes, relevant examples, or even hypothetical scenarios that illustrate your points in a more engaging way. For example, instead of just stating a statistic about climate change, you could share a story about a community impacted by rising sea levels, or a personal anecdote about how you've witnessed the effects of climate change firsthand. These stories make the issue more tangible and relatable, increasing the likelihood that your message will resonate. Remember, persuasion is not about manipulation or trickery. It's about building trust, fostering understanding, and presenting your ideas in a way that's both compelling and respectful. So, there you have it. Winning an argument isn't about who shouts the loudest or who can talk over everyone else. It's about building a strong case, using logic and evidence, and staying calm and respectful even when you disagree. So go forth, my friends, and may your arguments be filled with logic, reason, and maybe even a little bit of empathy.